There you go.
Okay, there we go. So we got it. So, hey, today's presentation is on price reductions, and I wanted to talk about a program, give you guys a sample script, a way to, to deal with the reality of the market, because in a normal market, a good portion of the homes will not sell without a price reduction. I mean, that's hard to believe after coming out of 2.5 years of COVID, where everything's sold, for $50, $75, $100, $25,000 over asking price. It's hard to imagine that, but in a normal market, a good percentage of the homes will not sell without a price reduction. And there's two reasons for that. Number one is that the market changes from the time you first put the property on the market until, you put something on the market and the price isn't good enough and the market changes and it goes down. And so you have to follow the market down. The other one is that the seller overprices the property from the very beginning of the listing. Now, I don't know how many times you guys have experienced that, but I know from my experience, it's quite often that the seller doesn't follow your suggestions on price and you end up listing the home at their price. Does that sound familiar to most of you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, it's worth 250,000. Well, I really want to try 275. Okay. And rather than walk away from the listing, we take the listing at the beginning and then have to work them down a little bit later.
I guess my headphones aren't going to work.
So somebody's got headphones that are not working. I can hear you. There we go. Okay. So where am I at? Okay. You know that home for only two reasons. There's only two reasons that homes sell: the price of the home and the value of the home for the price. And the second reason is exposure. Those are the only two reasons that a home sells. I know that's sort of humbling to think that it's not our advertising, it's not our marketing, it's not our great scripts, it's not any of those other things, but I can tell you that a buyer doesn't choose to buy a home because you talked them into it. The buyer buys the home because the price that's offered on the home is a good value in the eyes of the buyer. That's why the home sells. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. The buyer is going to choose the house because the price and the value meet their needs. The second part, the exposure part of it, is that if no buyers are aware of the house and they're not aware of the price, that there's nobody that's going to be interested in buying the house. So there's really only two things that make a difference: making sure that our marketing exposes the property to the marketplace and that the features and benefits for the house are a good value and the price is correct. If you have those two things together, proper exposure and the proper price and value for the home, it will sell. To me, that's pretty humbling, because you can have an agent that's been in the business for 2 minutes that has a listing that is properly priced and puts it in the MLS and it will sell. And your 38 years of experience doesn't mean anything. It is the exposure and the price of the home that's going to help it sell. Now, I know you guys, many of you have heard this before. Most of the time, the sellers think the reason their home isn't selling is because you aren't advertising it enough. You're not advertising it in the right places, that the pictures aren't good enough quality. You don't have color flyers. You don't have a professional brochure, and that you aren't featuring the right information online and in the written material. Have you guys ever heard that before? Seller says, would you change the pictures? Because that's the reason it's not selling. We know that that's not true. We know that's not true. The homes sell because of price and exposure. Okay, so we need to learn and develop sales skills and strategies to effectively help us convince our sellers and help them come to understand the truth, and then get them to take the right action that will help us get their home sold. Now, one of the things, I have a friend that, got into real estate about 10, 15 years ago, and he's used this line with me, and I really love it. He says, sometimes selling real estate seems like explaining the obvious to the unreasonable. Think about that for a second. Selling real estate sometimes is like explaining the obvious to the unreasonable. Now, things that are very obvious to us is that price and exposure are what it takes to get a home sold. Our buyers and our sellers aren't necessarily aware that that's what the truth is. And we consider it to be obvious, right? We consider it to be, standard operating procedures that it needs to be the right price. Well, the sellers don't know that. So things aren't as obvious to them as it is to us. And so a lot of times we get frustrated when we're dealing with our sellers in price because we think that what's obvious to us is obvious to them when it's not. And we think they're being unreasonable. When they're not being unreasonable, they are simply uneducated, and they need our skills to help convince them of what it's going to take in order to get the house sold. I feel a lot of times that it's really hard to sell a guy's home or a client's home with both arms tied behind my back. Have you ever felt like that? You've got both arms tied behind your back and they're saying, sell my house. It's overpriced. I don't want to sign. I don't want a lockbox on it. I want it to be appointment only on Saturdays between 4:30 in the afternoon and 6:30. And they're asking us the house, but they've tied all of our hands behind our back. So it's very difficult, but we can build our skills to make things better. So I've got a series of thoughts I want you guys to write down or to consider when we're talking about a price reduction program. So the first thought is that I believe that we are afraid to ask for a price reduction because we don't want to admit sometimes that we were wrong with the price that we suggested when we took the listing. So think about this for a second. You go out and you talk with the seller and they're reasonable and they listen to your suggestion on price, and you say, well, the comps are between 220 and 245. I think that your home is, probably in the middle of that. So I'm going to recommend 239.9. And the seller says, okay, we'll list it at 239.9 because we value your judgment. And then you find yourself 45 days into the listing and it hasn't sold. And so you ask some of the people that you've shown the property to, or some of the other agents that have shown the property, and you've looked at the comps and the market's changed a little bit. And now all of a sudden you're getting feedback that says, hey, you really need to be at 220 to get this sold. How hard is it to go to that seller and say, you know what, I made a mistake. When we went through the comparables in the beginning, I recommended a price of 239.9. And now I'm getting feedback from other people that we really need to be at 220,000 to be successful in getting your home sold. I think we don't ask for price reductions for a lot of times because we're afraid of saying that we made a mistake. And that is a disservice to the seller. If we made a mistake, it is a disservice to them not to go back to them and tell them, hey, we need to reduce the price in order to get the home sold. Another reason I think we're afraid to ask for a price reduction is sometimes we don't believe that price and exposure are what sell homes. Sometimes we think that the seller has convinced us that if we were better agents, we would have a bigger advertising budget, or we would have a better photographer, or we would do a virtual walkthrough, or we would do, some virtual floor plan because that's the secret to get the home sold. All of those tools that I just described, the virtual tours, the virtual walkthrough, the 3D tours, and all of that, those are tools that impress people, but they're not reasons why people buy the home. When you go out and you tell a seller, I will do a virtual tour for you, I'll do a 3D walkthrough, I will do a virtual floor plan for you, I will have drone shots, and I'm going to have twilight photos, and I'm going to have a super duper color brochure for you, and we're going to mail it out to 1,000 people. None of those things that you just promised makes the buyer buy the house. The buyer buys the house because of the price and the exposure, making sure that they're aware of the house. All of those things that you talked about are designed to impress the seller so they will list the property with you. Think about that for a second, okay? The third thing that I wrote down about things that we should consider is that sometimes we don't know the market statistics, and we don't know how to use them to help convince the seller of what's actually taking place in the market. We need to learn how to use the market statistics to help the sellers understand what's going on in the market. The fourth thing I wrote down is we don't know what to say. We don't have a price reduction script, and we don't have a price reduction program that we're following. So we don't know what to say to them. So we're afraid to ask for the price reduction. The next thing I wrote down is that we are afraid the seller is going to get mad at us. And that's true. Sometimes the sellers do get mad at us, and it's not fun, but that's okay too. The next thing is that we're afraid that the seller will say no if we ask for a price reduction. Think of what it's like to be a man when you're out trying to date ladies, and you find a lady and you ask her out on a date and she says no. It's not the end of the world. You guys have to learn that there is rejection in selling. Okay. It's important to get past that fear of rejection. If we ask for a price reduction and they say no, it's not something personal to us. It just means that it's going to be harder for us to get the home sold. The next thing that I wrote down is that we sometimes ask for too small of a price reduction. Instead of making our price reduction based on what the market's telling us, we ask for a price reduction that we think the seller will agree to, rather than the price reduction that it's going to take to get the property sold. Okay, so there's a series of thoughts for you. So I'm going to suggest that you incorporate the following actions into what I like to call a listing servicing program. Okay, the part about getting a price reduction to get your home sold doesn't start with the day that you call them and ask them for a price reduction. It starts at the very beginning of your relationship with them. So the first thing that I wrote down regarding having a listing servicing program is to tell them the truth about pricing and communicate expectations at the listing presentation. And some of those things may include saying, I recommend a price of $239,900. Will you list your home for that? No, we want to try $249,000. Okay, so you may agree to take the listing at a higher price. But one of the things that I'm going to do, Mr. Seller, is during our listing, I'm going to be reaching out to you with feedback. I'm going to go through our plan of action to get your home sold, which includes getting feedback from the agents that show your home. And I'm going to share that feedback with you on a weekly or a biweekly or a monthly basis, whatever you've agreed to do in your listing servicing program. So tell them the truth about pricing up front and communicate what their expectations should be for your behavior during the listing, but tell them that at the listing presentation. The second thing I wrote down is to clearly understand what the seller's motivation is for selling. Why are they thinking about selling? Now, the most common thing all of the agents in Big Bear hear from sellers when you ask them why they're thinking about selling, they're saying, well, we're not using it, but I don't have to sell. They always say, I don't have to sell. I don't have to give it away. You hear all of those things, but what's really important is why are they thinking of selling? Because that phrase, I don't have to sell, that's not really an objection. What they're saying to you is they're trying to protect themselves from being taken advantage of by you. They're sort of backing off and saying, don't push me, don't push me. What they're asking you to do is give them good reasons to price the property correctly. Their motivation might be to put their grandkids through college. Their motivation may be to stop spending $25,000 a year on a house that they're not using. So find out what their motivation for selling is, and don't be put off by their objection saying, I don't have to sell. That's not how we're going to convince them to go to the right price. The way that we're going to do that is to remind them of their motivation and show them how selling at the right price is actually going to help them achieve what they're trying to do. The next thing I wrote down is to do what you say you're going to do with your marketing before you approach them for a price adjustment. Do what you say you're going to do. So I don't know who has a listing checklist as part of their business plan. But I can go through sort of from memory some of the listing things that we do for, we put a for sale sign up, we put it in the Big Bear MLS, we put it in the CR MLS, we take the professional photos, we put a lockbox on the property, we submit, the properties to MLS with, good comments, share those comments with the seller for their approval. We will have agents that will tour the property and give us feedback when they tour the property. When agents call and inquire about the listing or show the property, we reach out for them for feedback afterwards. So we have this checklist of things that we're doing from a marketing standpoint. Make sure you do those things. Everything that you promise that you're going to do to the seller, make sure you do those things before you ask for a price reduction. Because from the seller's point of view, if you call them up a week later and say, I think we made a mistake, the price is too high, but you haven't done half of the things that you said that you were going to do for them, it makes them question you a little bit, okay? The next thing I wrote down is to make sure that you update the seller regularly, and I think that regularly is at least weekly, and include the market statistics when you are giving them an update. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you now, and I'm going to, give me a second here as I do this. Let's see, where is it? Okay, so I wanted to share this screen with you so you can see what. Okay, so I am going to get rid of that. So here's an example of a market update that that I did for one of my sellers this last a couple of weeks ago, or on the 4th. And it says, Brent, this is a guy that's got a fixer-upper over on 758 Silvertip. And so I'm just going to sort of read to you, and then I'm going to show you where the market statistics are in it. As we enter the final quarter of 2022, it's clear that almost everyone knows that the real estate market has changed drastically post-pandemic. The turning point, according to statistics, seems to point to May 22nd, 2022. Since then, the news about real estate, the broad economy, interest rates, the stock market, and inflation have all turned for the worse. This being an election year, it is hard to imagine things not getting worse after the November 8th election. The overall sentiment is negative. There is no doubt about that, yet some homes are still selling. Let's talk about that. According to the Case-Shiller Index, prices have fallen 3 months in a row nationwide, yet they are still 10 to 15% higher than a year ago. The vast majority of sellers this year priced at the high end to start their listing and have reduced back to a more realistic price point. I feel you are priced realistically based on the closed sales and competition, but that really doesn't solve the problem we are facing now. So here's the important part. The real problem is that interest rates have more than doubled from 3.25% to 7.25% in the past 6 months, making your realistically priced property, in our minds, twice as expensive for a buyer than it was 6 months ago. That's why the market has stopped, and that is why buyers who want to buy are waiting. I'm going to offer you a suggestion if you would be willing to make a 10% price adjustment. We know 10% is better than a 50% price reduction, right? I have found an innovative loan program that I would like to discuss with you that will effectively help buyers afford your home at the new higher interest rates for the next 3 years. It is called a 3-2-1 buy down. It's perfectly designed for this market, giving a buyer an incentive to buy your home now before the prices start falling as sellers continue to reduce their prices to entice a buyer. The market is clearly not bad by most measures, but it has changed and may take some creativity on our part to get your home sold now before the market does become a bad buyer's market. And then below it, I have a very, very simple explanation of the market statistics. Over the past 7 days, there were 19 new residential listings. The total residential listings were 305. The total properties under contract were 104. Price reductions in the last 7 days were 29. That's almost 10% of the market. The back on the market thing falling out of escrow was 7. 25 things went under contract, closed escrows. The past 7 days were 37. And the canceled, expired, withdrawn was 21. And so it's important to have those market statistics in your market updates and make sure that your clients are aware of them, because you will see trends. And so one of the things that I will do with my sellers is I will go back and say, hey, 3 months ago, there were 420 houses for sale. The inventory has dropped. Back in, March, there was only 62 properties for sale at the beginning of March this year. And so it pays to know your market statistics. So now that I've read that to you, is there any questions on what I put in that seller update and how you can use them in your own?
I would say no questions, but it was like excellently written. Especially when you try and flip it towards a positive, like the part where you said, hey, 10% reduction is better than a 50% reduction. And depending on when someone purchased their property and what kind of appreciation they realized. So say they purchased in 2017, they realized a pretty significant market increase. You could also show them that, exemplify that 10% reduction is such a small fraction of that overall growth, right? Because some people doubled property value. So if you went from, for example, 100 to 200,000, well, you made 100% value, but now your $200,000 house is going to be reduced. That 10%, that could be 20 grand on market value today, but overall you still made it a percentage gain. That you want to convince them that, like, equity isn't realized money until sell. And so that chasing the market, I don't know, there's just ways to keep that script in a positive, like, look, you have realized, make sure that you continue to realize that potential gain by not tripping over these dollars that can't be realized until sale. It's a little lengthy in the words there, but
and you're right you're on the right track. Because our job as salespeople is to influence thought. And a lot of times our clients are not thinking clearly. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not thinking clearly, and they are thinking of the negatives. And I'll give you a real life example. And this goes back to, I want to say, to the 2008, 2009, when the market crashed. I know Mary was in the market at that time. I don't know if Sarah was selling during that time, but I was selling during that time. And one of the things that was happening was that property values dropped 50% from 2008 to the peak of the market the way it was at the end of 2006. The market dropped 50%. And there were a lot of people that said, well, I can't lose money. Well, dropping from 2006 to 2008, dropping 50% was a huge reduction. But a lot of the people that we were talking to had bought their properties in 1993. And the property values where people purchased in 1993, they paid $100,000 in 1993. It went up to $450,000 and it dropped down to $225,000. Well, they really hadn't lost anything except paper money. They'd actually made $125,000, $150,000 in profit. They had lost the perception of it. Does that make sense? And so a lot of the times we have to think of creative ways to explain the reality to people. The most important thing that I ever heard during that period of time is a lot of people paid $100,000 for their cabin. It went up to $350,000, and they refinanced and they pulled $150,000 in cash out. They went and they bought a boat. They went and bought a motorhome. They went and bought, a great vacation and went to Hawaii for a month or something. And now they owed $250,000 on a house that they paid $100,000 for. And when the market fell down to 175, they said, well, I lost 75,000. And my answer to them was, no, you did not lose 75,000. You already spent all of your equity, unfortunately. You borrowed on your equity and you spent it. That was the real problem. Now you have to say that nicely, but that is the obvious truth, that we're dealing with when we're talking with our sellers. So I've taken us a little bit off of the topic of the price reduction in the script, but this goes back into understanding our business and understanding the market and finding creative ways to positively talk to our clients about what the best thing is. The best part about my seller update is, homes are selling. Let's talk about that, because that's what we're trying to do, is help them get the home sold. So after the market statistics, I suggest that you share those with your clients. After that, I wrote down to incorporate fundamental sales skills in your price reduction script. And those two things that I really want us to focus on here is to remember that selling is not telling. Selling is a series of questions that leads the client to the appropriate conclusion. So there's two ways to approach this. And so a couple of real life scenarios. One is if I say, Sarah, you're listed at $239,000, you're overpriced, you need to reduce it to $215,000 to get it sold. That might be truthful information, but that's not a good sales presentation. I just told you something that you're not going to be happy to hear, right? But if I say, hey, Sarah, we listed the property at $239,000, and at the time that we did that, that was based on the comps. We've been on the market now for 45 days. Does that concern you? Say yes. Yeah, it concerns me. Okay. During that period of time, well, and actually I'm going into our script. So let's go into the script. Hi, Sarah, I'm calling to follow up and discuss your home and the market. Have you been receiving the current market statistics I've been sending you each week?
I have.
Okay. Is there anything that you've picked up in there that's concerning to you?
Just the pricing and the amount of homes on the market and the fact that my house is still sitting there.
Yeah, I know it's disappointing. Our hope was to get the home sold in 45 days. And, really, this last seller market update that I sent you, highlights what our challenge is right now. And the challenge is that the comps really haven't fallen so much, and yet it costs twice as much for a buyer to buy your home today than it did 6 months ago. And that's why the buyers are not, that's why they're not buying. You don't want to reduce your price in half to make a buyer happy, do you?
No.
No, okay. So we need to figure out some things that will help make your home stand out, so that we can get your home sold. I've also updated you on all of our marketing efforts, so far. We did the professional photos, and you've seen the marketing that we've done. You've seen the Zillow ads, you've seen the things that are on realtor.com. Is there anything that we talked about doing in our listing presentation that we haven't done so far?
No, I think we've done everything, but I told you my absolute rock bottom price, and that's where we're headed.
And so what is your rock bottom price? Again, 220 is your rock bottom price. Okay. So if you had a $220,000 cash offer for 30 days, you would take it, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to recommend a price then of $219,900 and just stay firm. Would that be okay with you?
Okay, but that can be the last price reduction. We can't lower it more.
Okay, I got it. Okay. So she was very easy with me. Granted, she was very, very easy with me, because there's other things that I would go through in my script. So I'm going to sort of go through the script that typically that I would normally do. I would say, hi, Sarah, I'm calling to follow up and discuss your home in the market. Do you have a minute? She would say, yes. I'd say, have you been receiving the current market statistics I have been sending you each week, updating you on the market? She would say, yes. And then we would discuss the trends and what we're seeing in the market and, what's significant about, the information that I've been sharing. I would also say I've been updating you with our marketing efforts and the feedback we have received from the potential buyers and agents who have looked at your home. Have you had a chance to absorb all of that information? Again, these are questions. I'm sharing information with her, and then I'm asking questions because I want her to participate in the conversation. And then I go into, can I tell you what concerns me about that going forward? We've been on the market for 45 days, and during that time, 6 other homes have gone under contract that were similar to yours, meaning that the buyers were aware of your home and chose the other homes instead. Can we afford to have that continue? Not if you want to be successful in selling, right? Professional agents know that if you have very few showings and your home doesn't sell, or if you have a lot of showings and your home doesn't get any offers, that we know that we're overpriced. Does that make sense? So I'm going to recommend, if you want to successfully get your home sold, that we reduce the home to a minimum of 10% or whatever I think that we're going to need to sell it, which is $219,900, so that we can make your home more attractive and more valuable in the market so we can get your home sold. Are you willing to go ahead and make that change today? And Sarah already said yes. So I have a script and I have a program. I'm giving them market data that is factual, that's helpful for them so that they have information to make a decision. I make sure that they're aware that I've done all the things that I promised to do during the listing presentation to them. I give them the feedback, the honest feedback that we're getting from the people that are looking at the home. And then I come to them with a price reduction script that is based on questions so that they give me the right answers. I don't want to tell somebody what they have to do. I want them to come to that conclusion. One of my favorite quotes is, "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still." I mean, I don't know when I learned that, but I mean, if you browbeat somebody into changing their mind, they may agree with you just to make you go away, but they really haven't changed their mind. If you browbeat them to do that, it really doesn't change their mind. So you want to give them information, you want to give them statistics, you want to give them facts, you want to ask them questions so that they come up with the answer that you're trying to lead them to. And you can certainly make suggestions and approve of things that they say that are positive. If they go, "Well, I'm not going to reduce the price, at this time," I'm going to say, "Well, what will you do if the market continues to decline? Are you going to be willing to reduce the price, Sarah, to $210,000 in 60 days if we're still unsuccessful in getting your home sold?" She says no. Okay. So I'm going to suggest that you implement these programs into your marketing, into your seller servicing, and adopt a script and this process into getting listing presentations. You can have this conversation with the seller at 30 days into the listing, at 45 days into the listing, at 60 days into the listing, at 90 days into the listing. Heaven forbid you have to have a third price reduction conversation with your seller. But if you did have this program as part of your business, would you sell more of your listings? The answer is, of course you would. Okay. So last thing I wrote down, does this sound like a lot of work? Jonathan says no. I've been coaching and training and observing real estate agents for the last 38 years. There's a lot of real estate agents that don't do this. Probably more than half. Probably more than half of the agents don't follow the suggestions that I've just made to you to incorporate into your seller servicing business. It's like work. It's a job. It's a job. It means that every week you're going to be doing a market update to your sellers. It means that at least every month that you're going to be having a conversation with them on the phone, or you're going to be having a conversation with them over Zoom, where you're going to be going through this process, trying to get them to reevaluate their pricing and get it to a price that will cause it to sell. The worst thing in the world you can do is take a listing for 90 days or 6 months, and at the end of that 6 months, have the seller say, I'm going to cancel the listing, or I'm going to let it expire. And then 2 weeks later, it's listed with another agent at the price that you should have told them to list it with, during one of these price reduction conversations. So it is work, and it sounds like a real job because it is, but it's a very well-paying job if you do it right. So that's my suggestions on a price reduction program and a price reduction script. You can certainly modify it to make it your own. Is there any questions or any comments that you guys wanted to go over before we're done for today?
I was going to ask do you automate anything? So, I mean, I'm new, everybody should know that, but like in my mind, like I would try and automate as much as possible. So like the best way to support my seller would be to say, okay, these are your comparables. And then watching those comparables, you can give them these we'll just say not simple, but the statistics say, okay, 7 of these sold in the last week, 7 came back on the market. But in understanding, say, hey, these are always your competition, right? How many of those were price reductions? I guess a way of like putting automatic updates, whether it be a Redfin or even the MLS, something that triggers it, like, this is my listing for 1 million. I find similar listings for 1 million in the Big Bear MLS. I get them on like an auto trigger, if you will. That way, when they do have price reductions, I'm not being left behind because I'm not having that conversation. Does that make sense? Or when they go pending, I want to know what my competition is for that house so that I can start to anticipate. I'm going to be wordy. I always am, but
Yeah.
ways to get it to make sure that you're staying on top of it, but not having to force yourself to check every single day, like, oh, those other 6 houses in the neighborhood, have they price reduced yet? But like, just trying to find ways to automate. Is that just more of a suggestion than anything else, I guess? But
Well, and here's, so I have several comments that I want to make. I think number one, I would say that your personality style is analytical, right? Yeah, very, very, very analytical. Okay. And so one of the, there's pros and cons to every personality style. I'm analytical too. So there's no criticism in knowing what your personality styles are and that there's positives and negatives. One of the things that I pointed out yesterday in our class in the foundation is that the analyticals a lot of times will want to create a perfect system before they implement the system. And a lot of times implementing an imperfect system and refining it is a better way to do it. So I will just share that with you. You can have a 70% effective system that will work a lot better than the perfect system that you haven't started yet. Okay. The second thing that I would say is that when I'm doing coaching or training, I like to talk a lot about principles. And so the principles, I'm sort of going to remind everybody what the principles are in here, is that this is a job. And part of the job is to communicate and to give information and to be helpful to your clients. So by telling them what you're going to do from a marketing standpoint, then doing it, and then telling them what you've done is a principle. To give them the market statistics and understand the direction that the market is going and be able to articulate it to them with a script or, with good dialogue that helps them understand what the statistics are doing. That's a principle. Does it make sense?
yes.
To have a question-based presentation when you're asking for the price reduction is a principle. So those are the 3 principles that are important about the class today. I'm old school. Okay, I'm old school. So a lot of the times I will do things that will be designed to save me time. For example, that price reduction email that you saw, I have a Word document that I go in and I modify it for the price reduction for that week. I do a boilerplate one for all of my sellers, and then I cut and paste it into an email, and then I take that and I put in the comments from the showings, and I put in things that are specific to that listing before I send it. Now, that's a system that I use that works for me. It's certainly not automated, but I have taken steps that will make me more efficient in doing it. Does it make sense? It's personalized. I have boilerplate stuff for all my sellers that I think is important about the market, but then I put things that are specific to my sellers so it doesn't look like it's automated. It doesn't look like, I want them to know that I am reaching out to them personally because I want that touch with them. Does that make sense? There are things that can be done for tech people, that are certainly going to be faster and more efficient than the way that I'm doing it. And that's the beautiful thing about real estate, is that each of us has skills, each of us has time and talent to create what I call our unique selling propositions. You're going to come up with something that is unique to you as long as you use those 3 or 4 fundamental things that we're talking about and incorporate it into your business. I don't care whether you do it automated. You could send them something out of the MLS that has search criteria for their house, and you could send that to them where it updates automatically. And you can go back and remember when we first listed, this house sold and this house sold and this house sold and this one got reduced and this one got reduced. and these 5 other new ones came on the market and all this time yours didn't sell, that would be a great way to do it. And I think it's along the lines of what you're talking about with automating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it was more just like suggestion is like, I love metrics because they tell a story, right? Because then that story can help us give the positive and negative of where things are going or how we would like to steer it. And so that's what I was just thinking. It's like to help me influence and get my metric, it was to put those things on an auto update to me. That way
Yeah.
I was always abreast of what the market changes were with the competition, say per each listing. When I watch a few of Jessica's listings and some of the results we've had, unfortunately, like, people said no to 50,000 before, below their list on a $1.5 million property. And now they've just recently accepted 250,000 below. Right.
Yeah.
And then even another one where we priced high initially, and I was in on that listing presentation where because we had a neighboring house that listed way out of market, it pushed this seller to want to list high, and I was against it. But then now we're 80,000 below, I think, in this lease option that we've been discussing with you, and it's still, he's absorbing a lot of the risk. So it's just one of those things
Yeah.
where those metrics
Yeah.
are important.
I mean, it's good, Jonathan. I mean, like I said, going back, it's when I'm doing coaching or training, is I like to talk in principles. Take those principles and implement a system that is yours, something that works for you, one that makes sense for you, one that you're comfortable with. And when you implement it, watch your results. And if the things are working for you, continue to do them. And if you run across something that doesn't work, then try and reevaluate and then adjust. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Is there a topic that this group wants to have for the next company broker class? Okay, we'll wait for some suggestions later. Thank you guys all for showing up, and go out and sell a bunch today, okay?
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.